You're listening to the Coach's Locker podcast with Chris Fore. Really appreciate you being here today. I had a great time interviewing Jeff Pearlman for this episode. Jeff is a New York Times best-selling author of 9 books. He wrote The Bad Guys Won about the 1986 New York Mets, 2004. He wrote a book called Love Me, Hate Me. That's about Barry Bonds, 2006. He wrote a book called Boys Will Be Boys about the 1990s Cowboys. That's definitely one of my top books that I've read of his. He wrote a book called The Rocket That Fell to Earth about Roger Clemens. Sweetness about Walter Payton. My second favorite book he wrote about the 1980s Lakers called Showtime. That was one of the best sellers. He wrote a book about Brett Favre called Gunslinger back in 2016. And he wrote a book about the USFL, United States Football League, called Football for a Buck. This Tuesday, September 22nd, he has coming out a really, really great book. I haven't read it yet, but I know it will be. He's got a book coming out this week about the Kobe and Shaq era Lakers with Coach Jackson. So I'm really looking forward to getting it. I actually asked my sister-in-law for it last Christmas, and so she pre-ordered it at that time. It's called 3 Ring Circus, Kobe, Shaq, Phil, and the Crazy Years of the Laker Dynasty. We'll talk today about the folks that he interviewed for that book, including Shaq and Coach Phil. It's a story of the Lakers from 96 through 2004 when Kobe and Shaq combined and collided to help bring the Lakers 3 straight championships and restore the franchise as a powerhouse. In the history of modern sport, there have never been 2 high-level teammates who loathed each other the way Shaq and Kobe Bryant did. Kobe Bryant loathed Shaq, Shaq loathed him. From public sniping and sparring to physical altercations and the repeated threats of trade, it was warfare between these two. And yet, despite 8 years of infighting and hostility, by turns mediated and encouraged by Coach Phil Jackson, the Shaq-Kobe duo resulted in one of the greatest dynasties in NBA history. Together, the two led the Lakers to 3 straight championships and returned glory and excitement to Los Angeles. We'll talk about why this book, when he wrote it. He actually wrote this book. It was completed before Kobe passed away. We'll talk about how long it took. We'll talk about the different aspects of putting together a book. We talk a little bit about sports in today's world. We talk about some of his favorite book. We talk about how Coach Phil Jackson got these two to mesh. How did that happen? We talk about how he refocused his teams after each championship. So I thank Jeff for coming on a little podcast like mine. Very gracious of him. But check out his website, jeffpearlman.com. That's JEFFPEARL, man.com, jeffpearlman.com. You can find him on Twitter. We talk about Twitter a little bit. I've messaged back and forth with him over the years. Really, really great guy. If you're on Twitter, reach out to him. He's at Jeff Pearlman, at Jeff Pearlman. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this podcast. All right. Hey, welcome back from that intro. Again, we're here with Jeff Pearlman, New York Times best-selling author. He's got a tremendous book coming out we're going to get into in just a bit. But before we start that, Jeff, thanks for joining us this morning.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's in a dark world. It's a nice little aside, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Some tough things going on in life right now, so I'm hoping that folks can take 45 minutes to hear about your background a little bit and this book you got coming out. Jeff, you're one of my favorite authors. I'm really excited to spend some time with you on the phone today. Some of my favorite sports books out there, I'm a pretty avid reader, are ones you've written. And so this is pretty cool. Gunslinger, probably my favorite book that you wrote about Brett Favre, and I've always been a Brett Favre fan, not a Packers fan, but Boys Will Be Boys, your book about the 90s Cowboys, loved that one. The Barry Bonds book, I'm about 3/4 of the way through that one, to be honest with you, but again, great insight. And then probably my second favorite book being Showtime. So, being a Southern California guy, not necessarily a basketball fan, but I'm a sports fan, so
yeah.
So again, thrilled to have you on. We do something called the kickoff, the tip-off, and the first pitch for my listeners here. Kind of get to know our podcast guest a little bit. Jeff, talk to us about the first team you ever played on And what do you remember from that athletic team?
Yeah, it was Little League Baseball, Mailpack New York, Mailpack Sports Association. My team was Jenny Oil because we were sponsored by a gas station, Jenny Oil.
Yeah.
I was the catcher. My best friend Gary Miller was on the team. And there was a play where I was on first base. I was not very good. And Gary hit a grounder in the hole between first and second. I was running. The ball hit me. The umpire said I was out. I started crying, and I started crying pretending that I was sad because the ball hit me. But it probably was rolling at about 2 miles an hour.
Yeah.
I actually was crying just because I was just embarrassed by the whole situation.
Mortified by that, right? You probably didn't know that rule either, right?
I didn't know anything.
Yeah. So it begs the question, Jeff. You're from New York, but on your website, you've got a Dodger hat on, man. And I hate the Dodgers. I'm a San Diego guy. What's up with the Dodger hat?
I bought it at Ross's Dress for Less for $8. About we moved here 6 years ago, so probably 6 years ago, and I like hats.
There we go.
That's truly it.
All right. Okay, all right. Are you a Yankees fan?
I grew up more of a Mets fan, but when you cover baseball, I covered baseball at Sports Illustrated for a long time. You kind of lose your rooting interest a little bit. You just root for nice people.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, how about the last team you played on and what you remember from that? I know you were a runner in college. Talk to us about the last team you ever played on.
Well, yeah, I guess that would be. I mean, yeah, I ran my freshman year, except for intramural. I'll tell you what. In college, I played on we had an intramural basketball team. We named it after the store in the show The Facts of Life called Edna's Edibles. Edna's Edibles. And it was Mrs. Garrett's pastry shop or whatever it was. And we ended up coming in second in the University of Delaware intramural basketball championships. I was I guess I was the center. I was good for about 8 points, 12 rebounds, 2 block shots. Not great, but serviceable.
Outstanding. Serviceable. That's good. Jeff, we talk a lot about on this podcast, my main audience is coaches. Who has been, and we talk about mentorship in that, we all learn from somebody. In your profession, in writing, who's been one of your main mentors or someone you've looked to through the years to help guide you?
And sadly, the person who was probably my number one mentor died last year, and his name was Bill Fleischman, and he was a longtime sports writer at the Philadelphia Daily News, and he also happened to be an adjunct professor at the University of Delaware when I was there, and he could not have been better to me, more helpful to me, offered more wisdom through the years. One of the nicest, he covered the Flyers during their heyday of the 70s for the Daily News. Just one of the best people I've ever met, and I was very, very, very fortunate to have him come into my life.
What do you think is one of the main one or two things you took away from that relationship?
The number one thing, all right, so I think about this now a lot because we live in an era in look at me journalism and my hot take and my tweet and blah, blah, blah. And Bill, he just wanted to tell a good story, and he was all about building relationships, fostering trust, being honest, being sincere, being a nice person, taking satisfaction in his work. It was not about him. You never saw the words I in his copy. And I learned a lot from that.
Yeah. Your worst mistake as a writer, what do you think that is?
Oh, Jesus Christ, man, there's so many. Can I make it my worst mistake as an editor, as a journalist?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. This takes more than 2 seconds, but I was a young writer at the Nashville Tennessean. Can I curse on this podcast, or do you prefer not?
You can.
Okay. I was a young writer at the Nashville Tennessean, and I worked in the features department. I was probably 25 years old, 24, 25. And I used to sit next to kind of the office manager, and her name was Sheila Jones, and we became very close. And one day, it was late at night, and I was working late, and I went onto her computer because we used to talk trash all the time. We had inter-office email, and I wrote on her computer from her to her a note that said, "Hey Sheila, fuck you," right? That's guilty. The next morning, I wake up and I get a call from the office. Everyone needs to come in. Sheila's been having trouble for the past few months with a stalker, and last night the stalker apparently walked up to her computer. Everyone needs to come in. We need to figure this out. I show up at the Tennessean. I'm like, "What's going on?" Blah blah blah. I go, "Sheila, can I talk to you?" I'm like, "Sheila, I just want you to know I wrote that letter. That was me." And she was so nice. She was like, "Jeff, I'm just so happy. It's not what I thought it was." And I said, "Do we have to tell the boss?" And she goes, "Jeff, we do." And I went in, and told my editor, Catherine May, who's still one of my best friends, I was crying, and she reamed me out, as she should have. It's definitely my biggest mistake as a journalist.
Wow, good story. So, okay, that's a question I had a little.
Not for me.
Not for you. Not for you. Not for you. Good for us. Entertaining for us. Yeah. So that's a question I had in here for you a little later. I'll hit it now. So after graduation from the University of Delaware, you get this job at the Tennessean as a food and fashion writer, right? Which is fascinating, as I did a little research about you to learn that because of your long, tremendous career in sports writing. How do you go from food and fashion writer for the Tennessean to Sports Illustrated, where you spent 7 years as a baseball writer?
Well, I never really should have been a food and fashion writer. I interned at the Tennessean, and they hired me for the only open position they had, food and fashion writer.
Gotcha.
And I did that, and I was really bad at it. And eventually I worked my way over to the high school wrestling beat for the Tennessean. And I was covering high school wrestling, and I applied. My dream was to write for Sports Illustrated for as many years as I can remember. And I just kept applying and applying and applying. And what really did it for me, when I was in college at the University of Delaware, when I was a junior writing for the student newspaper, The Review, I applied early for the NBA draft just to see what would happen. I didn't play college basketball. I just thought it'd be funny to apply for the NBA draft. And the NBA wrote me a letter, and then the head of security called me, and I ended up writing a story for my student newspaper. And I pitched that story to Sports Illustrated. I said, would you guys consider a piece about this?
Wow.
And that was my first story to run, and they hired me a few months later.
Wow. All right, so that fits in to what I kind of do as a side business where I consult coaches on their job search process, right? And I always talk to them about what you just did. You created something, you created content, you created something powerful, which led to you getting that job. That's an awesome story. All right, the next question on the kickoff, the tip-off, and the first pitch. What are you most proud of in journalism, your greatest accomplishment in journalism?
That's a good question. I don't really think in those terms that often. I mean, I think this is going to sound super, super corny, I admit. But, like, I look at my career now, and sometimes, like, I'll look at my phone. I need to call someone. And it just affords a ton of really meaningful relationships with really good people, not just writers, but sources, where people who have become your friends or your confidants, or they know they can trust in you. And that stuff really matters. Like, it's not like I sit there and I go, oh, I made it here, I did this or that, or blah, blah, blah. Like, I just kind of like that as I sit here in my late 40s, I've had this career that has resulted in a really fun, ridiculous ride, and I've been able to take it with some of the most unique and interesting people I could have ever thought of meeting. So that's been great. It's great. It's a great job.
I think that goes, Jeff, to what you said about your mentor earlier, right? A guy who did not use that word "I" in his stories, and a guy who was in it for relationships.
Yeah, and also, like, it's just really fun. Like, at some point in I think most people at some point in their life lose a little bit of their ambition to be the best, the highest paid, the most covered, and you just appreciate the things that actually really have some tangible worth. I've always been able to write from home and be around my kids, so I never miss field days, parent-teacher conferences, plays, stuff like that. Never. And I don't know, it's just really satisfying,
Yeah.
More so than me. I used to want to be the best sports writer in America. That was my goal. It's the stupidest thing anywhere. It doesn't even exist. It's not a real thing, and if it is a real thing, it's not me. But you just have these, you realize those things don't matter.
I think that parallels the coaching world. You get into it, you're young, you have ambitions, you start maybe winning or maybe not, but you go through this period of winning, it doesn't matter. And you just said it, so you got a lot in common there. I think, a lot of people do, no matter what you're doing, if you're in the stock market, if you're a doctor, you soon realize your career is more than just reaching maybe that ultimate pinnacle or writing that New York Times bestseller. It's what you learn, those relationships you pick up along the way. That's awesome to hear you say. How about kick off, the tip off, and the first pitch? Your favorite vacation spot, Jeff?
So we do a lot of, we have done in our lives a fair number of house swaps, which is you can go online and find people in, like, wherever. Someone may want to stay in California, you want to stay there. And we did, several years ago, we did Barcelona.
Wow.
And I have to say, Barcelona is one of my favorite places I've been to. I could very happily spend many a year in Barcelona. So I would say Barcelona. What's yours?
My favorite vacation spot, I've been to Mombasa, Kenya before, but it's been about 15 years. And Mombasa, Kenya is a beautiful, beautiful spot, just right on the coast over there. Very cheap way to live, and I think it's kind of a hidden gem in our world, because not a lot of people think of going to Mombasa, Kenya as a vacation spot, but that place is awesome. And I love Carlsbad, California.
I never had a travel agent say to me, "Have you thought about the Mombasa, Kenya vacation package?"
It is amazing. If you ever get a shot at it, you got to get over there. Jeff, you say on your website you're an addicted tweeter. I love Twitter myself. That's where you and I have traded a few messages over the years about writing, and I've always appreciated your availability on that avenue, on that platform. What do you like and enjoy about Twitter the most?
Nothing. I hate Twitter.
But you're addicted to it.
Yeah, I hate Twitter. I actually hate Twitter. I think Twitter is. If you told me tomorrow we could blow up Twitter, nobody would ever use it again, and it would be gone. Yeah. I think society as a whole would be much better off. If I have to choose, it's a good way to find people, and I have made some, nice relationships over Twitter.
Sure.
But, I had Tom Verducci on my podcast recently, the SI writer.
Yep.
And I was like, "How come you're not on Twitter?" He said, "Because nobody ever says anything good about the experience."
Yeah.
And I was like, "You're right.
Yeah.
As soon as I'm done writing books or I'm done.
You know what? I feel the same way in regards to, I've said that. I do, my consulting, I love being able to help coaches all over the nation. And a lot of that, I'd say 80% of that's come through Twitter. That's what I love about it. I love being able to help coaches with their punt scheme or their leadership. But sure. I would say if I had another avenue that would help me with that audience better, I would definitely go there. The last, I'd say 18 months on there has been a cesspool in a lot of ways. I agree.
Oh.
Yeah,
it's insufferable. It's insufferable and unbearable.
Yeah.
It really is.
So, one of your favorite athletes, okay, that you list on your website, I have his game used bat of his. Guess which one that might be. Guess which one.
I'm guessing either Ken Griffey Sr. or Gary Templeton.
Easy, right? Because it's those two baseball guys. So I've got a game used bat from Ken Griffey Jr. I collect game used bats, but I've got one from Gary Templeton. So. It was it was interesting to see. You said he's one of your favorites. How did that come to be?
So when you're a kid and certain people just rub off on you, and I was a big fan of badasses. I just was. I was drawn to badasses, and I remember being a kid and reading about Gary Templeton giving the fan to the fingers in St. Louis.
Yep.
And then refusing, the quote. It's a little debatable whether he actually said it, but I ain't starting, I ain't departing about the All-Star game.
Yeah, the All-Star game.
And he also had he had a great afro, and he had a strong arm, and he had 100 hits on each side of the plate in a single season. And he had 2 R's in his first name, and his name is Gary with 2 R's. What's that?
Yeah, different.
I just thought he was super, super, super cool, and I was all in.
Yeah. I loved him. I grew up down in San Diego, 80s, when he came to the Padres. I think in about 82 or 83, that trade with Ozzie Smith. And my parents were at one of the Game 5, the National League Championship between the Padres and the Cubs, and Tempe comes out of the dugout, and the Padres win that game, and they're on to their first World Series ever. And I don't know if you remember this, but he comes out of the dugout and he goes through all the the introduction, shaking all his, high-fiving all his teammates, and then turned to the crowd. And I got goosebumps right now, Jeff, telling the story again. He turns the crowd and starts firing up them with his hat. And my dad told me that he thinks that's why they won that baseball game. He got them just so fired up, that 65,000 people going crazy at Jack Murphy Stadium, and the Padres go on to down 3-0, I think, at one time in that game, and come back to win 6-3, 7-3, something like that. Yeah. So Tempe's one of my faves too. All right, Jeff, do you have – sorry, I cut you off. These 9 books you wrote, what's your favorite book? I know it's kind of like asking you your favorite child, right? But if you were to say this book was my favorite that I wrote, you've got, The Bad Guys one about the Mets, Love Me, Hate Me about Bonds. I kind of went over all of them in the intro. What's your favorite one?
Probably the USFL book, because it was kind of universally acknowledged that you shouldn't write that book. No one's going to buy it. Nobody's going to care. I only got the book deal because I attached it to the Brett Favre deal. Like I said, if I do a Favre book, please let me write this book.
Yeah.
And that's what Hard and Mifflin did. And I freaking love the USFL so much. The whole Donald Trump thing is almost coincidental and an aside. Like, I just love that week. And so there's something gratifying about everyone telling you not to do something, and then you do it, and then it works out.
Becomes a bestseller.
It becomes a bestseller. And it's never going to be my bestseller. It's not going to be the bestseller of all my books. But, like, I busted my ass in that book, and everyone told me not to do it, and I wanted to do it. So I did it, and I feel great about that.
That's awesome. That's good to hear. I know I've not read that one yet. It is on my list. Jeff, let's talk about something a little uncomfortable, something coaches deal with all the time, every Friday night if they're a football coach, and that's criticism. With the advent, especially of social media today, right, and message boards, coaches get a lot of criticism. Authors get a lot of criticism. Journalists, a lot of criticism. So I found this review about your Clemens book on a website called Tomato Nation. And the guy said this: Lord, this book about Clemens is dreadful. It's a leading candidate for the worst baseball book I've ever read. And yes, I've read one about of Canseco's. I'm glad I bought it, steeply discounted. I'm getting through it quickly, but that's only because, one, as a reader, I tend to hoover up trash at double speed, and two, there aren't many words on the pages. So how do you deal, as a journalist, how do you deal with that kind of criticism? I mean, you as you said earlier, you write a book, you pour your heart, soul, and life into it, and then you get this type of response. Again, something coaches deal with. How do you deal with it as a journalist?
It's funny. Well, I remember what that's about. I mean, that's one of the harshest reviews I've ever gotten, and it can be difficult. But here's the thing. I really mean this. Like, I've seen many movies I've hated, and I've tweeted out about movies I've hated, and I'm like, God, that movie stunk. Don't waste your money, right? Or, I don't know, Eminem puts out a bad album, or Tribe Called Quest puts out a bad album, and I say, this album stinks, right? Well, if I'm allowed to do that, she's allowed to do that too. Like, that's her right. And the other thing is, that book wasn't that good. That's my worst book. So it was. I mean, she had some really fair points. It was overwritten, and I had to rush it at the end, and it wasn't that good. So what am I supposed to say? She has every right. She has every right to have that opinion. And as I've gotten older, I think my skin has thickened okay. I'm not perfect. It still hurts. I'm not going to say hearing that makes me happy. It doesn't. But, like, as you get older, you learn to, not everyone's going to love everything you write. It's impossible. I don't love everything other people write. I do think as I've gotten older, I do less criticizing myself. You never will see me bash a writer for his quality or her quality of writing. I might bash someone for being prejudiced or being mean or whatever, but I will not bash someone for the quality or ability of their writing because it's so personal.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
I mean, that woman has every right to hate that book, every right, and every right to express it. And if that was the worst book she ever read, that was the worst book she ever read. What can I do?
Yeah, yeah. So to the new coach, to the younger coach, because I think what you said makes sense. With time, it kind of comes, it just kind of goes off your back, right, with time. But so what would your advice be to that younger coach who hasn't had that time in the seat on how to deal with that kind of criticism?
I mean, the number one thing I would say is before you respond to it, sleep on it.
Good.
Make sure this is really, is this really something you want to engage in? And how is this going to help you? And how is this going to resolve a situation? I recently had, this I haven't talked to anyone about. I had someone redesign my website, and it cost a lot of money. And she did a brutally bad job. And I thought kind of just washed her hands of me. She was doing a good job. I paid her early because I thought, wow, she's doing great. And then she just kind of ditched the project.
Wow.
And I was freaking furious. I hate my website now. It sucks. I used to have a good website, and I'm really upset. And I've written about 4 different emails to her, and then I delete them. Like, I'll sit on it and delete it, and sit on it and delete it. And what it's come back to for me, and I never used to be this way, is we're all going through this really horrible period right now. And I know that she's a mom with kids, and nothing's going to get resolved, right? Maybe she'll send me $500 back. I don't even know. Like, nothing's going to get resolved. I'm just going to be unsatisfied. She's going to be unsatisfied. I'm going to make her feel like crap. I'm going to feel like crap. Every now and then, it is okay to turn the other cheek and take the loss. You don't always have to have the last word. That's another thing I definitely learned over time. You don't always have to have the last word. Someone says, "Yeah, Pearlman, you're a punk and you're a wimp and blah blah blah." I bet you don't have the guts to respond to this. Like this social media kind of situation.
Yeah.
I don't have to respond to it. I can just mute that person and move on with my life and not think of it 5 minutes after it happens ever again.
Love it. Love that advice. Something I've been learning as a principal now. In fact, I sent my director of HR an email the other day. It was I sat down and wrote it to a person on our campus who supervises somebody else, and then I said, I'm not the advice you just gave. I said I'm not going to send this now, but dang, it felt good to write, and I'm going to send it to the HR director and get her advice on it. And I'll tell you, Jeff, when I sent it over to her, it kind of washed me of it, right? But it didn't create any further issue. So, and I got really good advice from that HR lady. So I love that advice you just gave, and I think that's very valuable to coaches out there. Sit on it, maybe write it, don't send it. Love that. Jeff, one of the things about that you take a lot of pride in is the number of people you talk to when you do your books. I think I read somewhere you spoke to more than 500 people when you wrote The Gunslinger, right, about Favre?
Yeah, that is correct.
So how do you go about, this quote I wrote down because it relates, before we jump into this Lakers book, transitioning into it, in the book about Bonds, you wrote this: "For Northern California parents who saw their sons as the next Willie Mays or Cliff Branch or Rick Barry, there were few places like Junipero Serra, a private all-boys school in San Carlos. Located just a few miles down El Camino Real from Bond's residence, Serra was to athletes what Caltech is to theoretical physicists." I freaking love that, the way you put that. It's an amazing opening, about Bonds' high school experience. Combine this with the principal, because so what happened, for those who haven't read it, a student on campus writes an article about how the schools kind of lost their way and kind of blast the principal and administration for hiring subpar teachers just because they coached. And it got me to think about my hiring practices a little bit when I read that. You're a guy who's written some of the best books about sports there are. Where do you see sports fitting into that high school experience like Barry Bonds had?
I mean, if it's good, it's great, and if it's bad, it's bad. I mean, I think.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, it's true. Like, there are a lot of kids who are really hurt by high school sports, who don't have a good experience, who don't have coaches who are encouraging, who don't, there's still a lot of male coaches out there on the high school level who will call maybe a kid who's not playing hard a girl. Like little things like that, like suggesting that, like, because you're a girl, you're weak. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of that stuff out there still. And there's still a lot of people, there's still a lot of coaches who, it's amazing, who in football, you don't need water now. You don't get water until blank. Kids like dehydrated and, shooting stars. You don't need water now. Water is for the weak. That's still much more common than people think.
Oh, yeah. You're right.
And it's maddening. It's maddening. So I think there are kids who walk away from sports, and far too many actually, who say, to hell with this. I don't need this. I'm never going to do this again. I'm just going to go hang out with my friends after school and play video games or whatever. Sit on my phone all day. And then on the flip side, I mean, running cross country and track in high school made me, taught me resilience, it taught me strength. And so many of these athletes taught them resilience, and taught them strength. I mean, the one thing that I think I don't like that I see now, I'd be interested to get your thought on this actually. Like, I did a story on Sam Darnold when he was at USC.
Yeah.
And he lives not that far from me, actually, here in Southern California. His parents made sure he was playing every sport imaginable. He was playing hoops in the street, and he was playing baseball, and every season was a different sport. What I see, especially out here in California, is if you play baseball, you're playing baseball 11 months.
Yep.
And if you play football and you're not playing during the season, you're working out for football the other months. And I think it sucks. I hate that. I think it delays development overall, social development, also in a way athletic development. It burns kids out.
Yep.
It turns them into robots. And the one thing I've seen as a sports writer, without question, is as the years have passed, there's young athletes have less they can tell you. Like I look at Kyler Murray, just as an example. That guy was made to be a quarterback in the NFL. Like he was created. He's not that different than a robot that was programmed to be a quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah.
And it's great that his dream came true, and it's great that he's a quarterback in the NFL. But what's the last book you read? What are the TV shows you like? What's your favorite food? What was your senior prom like? Like, too many kids now don't answer those questions very well, and I hate that.
You're so, man, this could be a whole podcast on its own. You're absolutely right. And Jeff, most high school coaches hate that as well. What we've seen, especially here in Southern California, we've seen the club sports take over. And you got these coaches that aren't high school coaches. They may have been in the past, but they're more club coaches. And they are killing sports. My oldest son's 13. When he was 5 years old, he played baseball, his first year ever. And this dad in the stands I was sitting next to had no clue of my background as a high school coach and athletic director, and starts telling me, oh, hey, my son was the biggest kid on the team. So guess what? He was also one of the best because he was the biggest, right? And I know that. I'm very realistic about his abilities. And this dad starts talking to me, and hey, you got to get your son playing on this winter ball team down the hill, which is 45 minutes down in the Inland Empire, because if you got to get him playing year-round, man, because he's got some good talent, and he'll get a scholarship. And I said to him, he's 5 years old. If he wants to keep playing, he can. I'll never forget that conversation. And he said, well, you got to get him focused on one sport. A lot of people these days do it wrong, da-da-da-da. And I said, I've probably helped 40 kids get into college through football as a coach and athletic director the last 20 years. I know how the game works, and he's not going to go play winter baseball with you and your group, But that's what happens.
Also, like, I just want to say, like, I everything you just said is infuriating, and I feel it 100%. And I also wish more parents would ask themselves, like, what's the end game?
Yep.
Like, you get one life, and I always think this, like, I remember when my daughter was young, and she was at Ward Elementary School in New Rochelle, New York, and we would be sitting in the courtyard, waiting to pick up our kids, and there would be talk about, what do you think about this teacher, and what do you think about that teacher, and oh, this kindergarten teacher is doing this, and blah 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 blah. I always think, like, all of us in the courtyard. I went to University of Delaware. The mom next to me went to Harvard. The guy next to me over there is a truck driver. The guy next to me over there, like, we all ended up in the same courtyard. So this rush to push our kids to be the absolute best at everything is exasperating, because at the end of the day, we live our lives, we do our best, hopefully have a good meal every now and then, hopefully everything goes well, and then you die and you move on. And this rush to be the best, what does it even mean?
Yeah.
This isn't even about, like, what does it even mean? Like, what is success? Like, what is it? I know some of the happiest people in the world who work on a cafeteria line. I know some of the most miserable people in the world who are attorneys who went to Harvard. Absolutely.
No, so well said. And I think that's where Sam got his balance. Two parents who are blue-collar people. One a middle school teacher. One, I think, works, I think, as a custodial or something at a hospital, his dad. And then you've got, Sam's head coach. I'm a good friend with him. He appreciates multi-sport athletes, at San Clemente High there. You do have some high school coaches who don't. They don't appreciate that because it's all winning to them. And that becomes ridiculous. So, Jeff, three-ring circus, Kobe, Shaq, Phil, and crazy years of the Laker dynasty. This book covers the story of the Lakers from 96 to 2004 when Kobe and Shaq combined and collided. I love that. Combined and collided to help bring the Lakers 3 straight championships. Why this book, Jeff?
Man, I get asked that a lot. I don't have the best answer. I would say the number one reason is the characters are enormous.
Yeah.
And they're just great characters, like, you got Shaq, you got Kobe, you got Phil. That's 3 huge characters to write a book around, which is always appealing. I think also the, just the sort of being out here in Southern California, having written Showtime, having that experience, it really left a good taste in my mouth. I really enjoyed writing about the Lakers. I think they're a pretty fun franchise to write about. I just felt compelled, I did it way before Kobe died.
Yeah.
I finished before Kobe died. I just felt compelled to write it, I guess is the best.
Yeah. And so Kobe dies earlier this year, January. I actually ordered this book. My wife comes in, hey, what do you want for Christmas? And I think I'd seen you tweet about being able to pre-order it. So my sister-in-law pre-ordered it, and that's what I got back in December for Christmas. And I'm excited to get it. Yeah, get it this week. So when did you start this book?
Started about 2.5 years ago.
2.5 years.
Yeah, probably about 2.5 years ago. I'd wrapped up the USFL book, and then I was doing this book. And it was a hard one to write. It was the most exhausting book I've written, I'd say.
Is that right?
Yeah, it just was. It really beat me down. And that's not to say I don't feel good about the book. I do. But it was hard. And, it was Kobe made it clear early on he wouldn't talk for the book, so that made it a little tough. The generation of athletes is different. Like these guys are just like, they're just used to the media more, and they're used to blowing off the media more, but it's just harder than it used to be. And they weren't, they're not as far retired as the athletes I oftentimes write of. And guys who have been far retired are generally easier to write about.
Yeah.
They're more they're thrilled you're calling,
Yeah.
So, so it was harder. I mean, there's a lot I enjoyed out of it. I feel good about the book. It was hard to escape the Shaq Kobe stratosphere. Like every time you think you're not writing about them, you're writing about them. Every time you think you're not talking to someone about them, you're talking to someone about them. But overall, I would say it was hard, but I'm happy with the final product.
So, why did Kobe not want to be involved? Do you know at all? Did you get that clarification ever?
I have guesses. I only have guesses, and my two guesses would be he was promoting his own book at the time, Mamba Mentality.
Yeah.
And I also think, the book, there are some awkward moments in this book. There's a lot of ego Colorado. That was a tough time for him.
Yeah.
An awkward time for him. And when you agree to write to help someone with a book, these things are going to be brought up, and you're going to have no editorial say on the completed product. You got nothing. So I don't know. I was disappointed, but I've never read a book where everybody agreed to talk, so it's not that shocking.
Sure. So pull the veil back a little bit. Do you write an outline, or hey, send it to Kobe's agent. Here's some of the things I'm going to ask him. Here's some of the way this book is going to be written. Will he consider it? How do you go about trying to get somebody to agree to talk to you?
You find out who their quote-unquote people are. So
okay.
You find out who Kobe's handlers are, who people go through to get him, and you generally reach out to him. And then I always write a letter. Like I think I wrote a letter to Kobe's house and sent it, usually with a book, and you try doing that. Yeah, it's really just a fishing expedition. Like Shaq, I got Shaq going through Turner. That was fairly easy. Phil, I got going through Jeannie Buss. That was fairly easy.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's hit or miss. It's a very hit or miss process.
So
you
again,
never get everyone. The goal is to get everyone, but you never get everyone.
Never get them all. So again, there's some correlation, coaches, to what I tell you about getting that job you want, that dream job you want. Work every angle. Get on the website. Find out what relationships you have with people. That's exactly what Jeff's talking about in writing this book. What relationships do you have with people on that school board, in that community, a press member? Some of the best info I've ever gotten about jobs come from members of the media who will tell you anything and everything about that position off the record. So again, the homework that he's talking about here correlates right to your job search. So getting to sit down with Phil Jackson, that's amazing. How'd that go about? I mean, not how it went about. You said Miss Buss helped you get it. What was that experience like?
Oh, it was great. It was 8 hours in Montana driving around with Phil Jackson.
Wow.
I was going to get an hour.
Wow.
Yeah, it was cool. It was amazing, and he was really interesting. Really, we drove around. I met him at a coffee shop. I thanked him for his time. He said, "I'm just doing it for Jeannie." I thought, "Oh crap, this isn't going to be great." And he gave me 8 hours. And
wow.
We drove around the lake, and we stopped for lunch, and we went back to his house, and we went to dinner later. And it was like I won the lottery of spend your day with Phil Jackson kind of thing. It was kind of funny.
That's amazing.
It was great. He was very, very gracious with his time, like very gracious.
So, to prepare to talk to you today, I did some homework about you and whatnot and wrote out some of my questions, right? How I'm sure you go into that day, or I don't know, I shouldn't make that assumption. Do you go into that meeting with Phil Jackson expecting an hour with a list of questions, or you just have them in your mind, or what? How do you handle that?
No, I generally have them in my mind. I've done enough research. I know what I want to ask him.
Yeah.
The goal is to make it a conversation. Like the goal is to make it a conversation. So You definitely don't want it to be, he says something and then you look at a list and you say, oh, blah, 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 blah. He says something and you look back at your list and you say something like, should be a conversation.
Yeah.
So that's important. And, you hope you get more than an hour. I only got an hour and 20 minutes with Shaq.
Okay.
I got a ton of time with Shaq. But when you know you have an hour and 20 minutes, you're much more pointed and focused on what you want to ask, too.
Yeah.
There are things and you're thinking in the back of your mind. If an answer is going on too long, it's almost like you got to find a way to interrupt it because you have X time.
Limited time.
You have things that you definitely want answered, yeah.
And so from, I've written 3 books myself, love writing. I wish I could make a living off of that because I love it, right? I see pictures of you every now, well, not lately because of the virus, but pictures of you, hey, I'm writing at this coffee shop at 11 o'clock at night, and I'm like, God dang, I absolutely love that part of writing and putting a book together. It's just spending time all by myself. Wife is in bed, kids are in bed, being able to just write, I love it. So, do you record those do you record 8 hours of Phil, or is it just you're just writing notes?
I recorded most of the 8 hours of Phil.
Yeah, yeah.
It'd be hard to take 8 hours of notes.
Oh, heck yeah.
yeah.
I
record most of it.
Yeah.
I record most of it. Yeah, that's what I get.
So, Shaq gives you some time. That's amazing you get that. I mean, are these guys over the years, all these athletes you've talked about, and I know it's probably all across the board, the relationship aspect you're talking about, do they let their hair down sometimes with you, or is it just all business or just a mixture all over the table?
I mean, you hope so, but it depends. Some guys are terrible, and some guys are terrible, and some guys are great, and some guys are open, and some guys are guarded, and it helps to be talking over a cup of coffee or talking over a meal, where it's a little more relaxed.
Yeah.
And it's all kind of a dance a little bit. Like there are things you want to hear about that they probably don't really want to talk about. And so in a way, I hope it doesn't come off manipulative, but you're trying to hear things that they don't want to tell you, and sometimes that happens and you kind of, I don't know. It's a weird thing being a journalist. Like part of interviewing skills are making people feel comfortable so they tell you things they don't want to tell you.
Sure.
It's a weird kind of relationship.
Tough place to get to. Yeah, tough place to get to sometimes. So Showtime, the book about Showtime, if you haven't read it, folks, if you're a basketball fan, a Laker fan, I'm really neither, to be honest with you. I'm a sports guy, and so I love reading books about some of these amazing teams. If you haven't read Showtime, make sure to get that. Jeff, the time between Showtime and Three Ring Circus, right? The Lakers, I guess you could say, not fell off the map. I mean, one of the greatest NBA franchises ever, but they didn't have a lot of success. What do you think, in all your research, writing this book, I don't know if you get into it in the book or not, but how did the Lakers bounce back to the Three Ring Circus success that they found in those 3 straight championships? How much of that turnaround was due to the bus leadership in who was leading the organization?
Well, I think a lot of it. You're talking about the transition between Showtime and the bounce back between the Showtime years and then the Kobe years.
Yes, sir.
I think you got to look at Jerry West first of all. I mean, he's one of the great constructors of teams in NBA history, and as savvy as it gets. And when they needed more money to get Shaq as a free agent, he figured out a way. He traded Anthony Peeler and George Lynch to Vancouver. When he needed to get Kobe, he kind of worked behind the scenes with Kobe's agent and made sure the Nets knew that Kobe wouldn't sign with them, so they better not pick him with the number 8 pick, and they didn't. And he was always a very masterful builder, like very masterful builder. It's just great talent,
Yeah, yeah. Shaq was NBA Finals in each of their victories, right? Was Kobe jealous of that?
Yes. He definitely wanted to win the NBA Finals MVP in that last year when they lost to Detroit. I mean, that was a goal of his.
Yeah.
So I think he was. I think he was young and dumb and
sure.
He was very aggressive and ambitious, very ambitious, and he wanted to be this star. And he wouldn't respond that well to being the number 2 star. I mean, he played well, but he didn't love it emotionally. So yeah, he definitely had jealousies of Shaquille O'Neal. And I think the main thing is he probably wouldn't be as jealous if he thought Shaquille O'Neal worked hard, but he was bothered by that. He was bothered by that, this idea that Shaq wasn't a hard worker.
Okay, so that brings up a great question. How did Phil, because Kobe was kind of known as being
all business, very driven, right? Shaq was known for being a little more of a fun guy, a little goofball. So how did Phil manage to bring those two together to find this? A lot of people say, why didn't it work out between these two, right? I think just the opposite. They won stinking 3 world championships, right? So how did Phil do that?
In a way, he did it by kind of being hands-offish in a way. Like, he wasn't always micromanaging, and he wasn't always, Kobe, you need to sell so. Shaq, you need to sell so. Like, he actually wasn't like that at all. He was, he knew when to push, he knew when to prod, he knew how to manipulate a bit. He put his trust in Shaq more than Kobe. You know, he liked Shaq more than Kobe. He definitely liked coaching Shaq more than Kobe.
Huh.
He knew the team needed to go through Shaquille O'Neal, that he was a dominant force in the NBA. And he just really trusted that. And he also, like, if you look at those teams, and there's a lot of Jerry West and Mitch Kupchak, they had a ton of veterans who sort of led from within. If you're talking about Fox, Ori, Brian Shaw, Derek Fisher, along the way, you know, little guys you wouldn't think of, John Sally, J.R. Reed, Glenn Rice, etc. And I think Jackson really just sort of wanted those guys to be the leaders, you know, more than him always having to have a heavy hand.
Man, a lot to be said there for coaches to understand, right? The mentality of letting your kids lead at our high school level, you know, and building up into them. So does and I know you hit this in the book. I know, you know, authors don't want to give away all their books, all their book intel. But when you say that Coach Jackson liked coaching Shaq more than Kobe, does he tell you that in the book, or is that just an assumption you've made through your time with him?
No, we talked about it. Shaq was much easier to coach.
Yeah.
Shaq was well, first of all, it's easier when your coach is considering you the centerpiece.
Sure.
Shaq was the centerpiece, so, you know, what's not to like? But he, you know, Kobe was difficult. Kobe was. It doesn't take away from his legacy and who he was, but he was tough, and he didn't love the triangle offense. He wanted to break out. And He wanted to dribble, look off a guy, take a shot, you know, drive to the hoop. He was not made for the triangle. He wasn't made really for disciplined coaching. So he was an outlier in a lot of ways, you know, but he was so talented and so gifted and so dogged, he made it work.
So Michael Jordan loved that offense, didn't he?
I wouldn't say he loved it. He was resistant to it too when Phil Jackson took over for Doug Collins, but he came to realize that it worked. Like,
yeah.
You're basically given a choice. You can be a guy on a team that barely makes the playoffs, but you average 38 a game. Or you can be a guy who wins championships, and you might be averaging 31 a game. That's your decision.
Yes. So no, fair point. What you said, he didn't love it. He came to accept it, came to realize it works for the overall success of the team. Do you think Kobe ever got to that same point that Michael Jordan did with that offense?
I think he might have the second run with Phil. I think first of all, he was kind of now the centerpiece of it. There was no Shaq, and guys like Lamar Odom and Pau Gasol were what he was, the two guy. So I think later on, I do think having that season after the 2004-05 season when Shaq is gone, Phil is gone, the Lakers stink. Everyone blames Kobe for driving everyone out of town. I think that was definitely an important little season for him, where he realized he needed Phil. Maybe he didn't need Shaq, but he definitely needed Phil.
So one of the things about when you see these teams win multiple championships, right, these dynasties, is how you turn the page to the next year. And we saw on the Michael Jordan documentary how Phil did that in Chicago one year. Did you guys get into that much here? How he's famous for his Zen approach to coaching. How did he refocus his teams after each of these championships?
See, it's kind of a weird question because it's not necessarily that he did. Like, people don't like this answer, but this is the truth. The Lakers had more talent than other teams. They did. And they had a better coach than other teams. And Shaquille O'Neal could spend his offseason, you know, getting fat and eating cheeseburgers and smoking cigars. And he was going to come back, and it would take him a while to get in shape. But he was still the most dominant big man in basketball by far, with no close second. And Kobe would spend the offseason shooting his jumpers and sweating his ass off, and he was going to come back, and he was going to be the best two-guard in the game. Like, that's how you do it. You're really, really, really good. You know, it's not like it's funny because I feel like coaches are always understandably looking for secrets. And I think the biggest secret isn't a secret at all. You have more talent than the other guy. You know?
Well said. Very true.
A lot of talent. They have a lot of talent. That's okay.
So, did you speak with Del Harris, the former Laker head coach, about his importance?
I spent a lot of time. Yeah, I spent a lot of time with Del. Really nice guy. Really nice guy.
Super good dude. I actually interviewed him back in the late '90s for a program at Azusa Pacific I was working on over at his condo. Awesome, very approachable, very good dude. I agree. Did you guys get into why it didn't work with him as a coach leading Kobe and Shaq?
I think he thought it could have. It's kind of interesting. I think he thought it could have, and I think he thought it should have. And it's interesting. He was really wounded because he wasn't invited to Kobe's last game. That definitely hurt his feelings. I can't say he was really wounded, but it definitely hurt his feelings.
Yeah.
I think he felt like it wasn't given enough of a chance, you know? That's what I also think. I think he felt he could have done the same things if he was given a chance and more time. And, you know, he was dealing with Nick Van Exel, who was very difficult.
Yeah.
And that was tough on him. So I just think he felt like he needed more of a, if he had been given the same opportunity to the same players, he could have had the same results.
Yeah. What I forgot to ask this a little earlier. I'm interested to know. When Kobe died, how did you find out about that, Jeff, and what went through your emotions?
I was sitting in a coffee shop in Irvine, California, and a friend texted me and said it, and disbelief. You know, I've been saying lately, it reminded me of when the Challenger exploded.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, I can't really wrap my head around this. This makes sense. That's how I felt, and later on, I had to start thinking about sort of, what do I do about the book? And I have author's note at the beginning. But it's not your priority. I mean, the first thing is you're just horrified.
Sure.
You know, you're just horrified. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to ask. Did it alter? I mean, the book was done, but obviously goes. Yeah. Was it fully edited? Done?
Yeah, it was edited. It was done.
And
just literally the pages were set and everything, and yeah. I mean, we just had to add something new to it.
Okay, so how'd you approach that?
I said, "Can I have a few pages at the beginning of the book where I can write something?" And they said, "Okay."
Gotcha.
And I basically wanted to make clear that like the Kobe you're reading in this book is from a very specific time of life.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean the person who died years later is the same person. It's a different guy.
Sure.
I just thought that was important to put out there.
No, that's
who you
fair.
are at 25.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's a really interesting place to be as an author. This book's all the way done. I think that's a great way you approach it. Two more questions, Jeff, from guys I grew up with. I texted a bunch of them. Here's the first one. Brian Thomas says, Kobe was a free agent, and it was rumored he was out looking into school systems and houses in Chicago specifically in 2004. But then Shaq came on and demanded a trade, and Kobe remained with the Lakers. Do you dig into this whole concept much in the book?
No, so that's not really what. Wait, in 2004, you saying?
That's what Brian said, but he might be off. He's not a very smart dude.
Yeah, no. So there was later some consideration of Kobe going to Chicago.
Okay.
But it wasn't at that same time period. Now, there was a point, and I only learned this from Howard Beck, a longtime sports writer, who told me during the 03-04 season, Shaq said to a bunch of those guys, the writers, he's like, they're going to trade me. I'm telling you, they're going to trade me.
Huh.
And later on, they did trade him. But if Kobe was going anywhere, it was the Clippers. That's where he was going to go.
Gotcha. My buddy Adam McQuethy said, who would win in a 3-on-3 game? Magic, Kareem, and Byron Scott. So you got Magic, Kareem, and Byron Scott versus Kobe, Shaq, and Rick Fox.
Oh. I'm going to have to go with the Kobe Shaq team. I think if you were playing 80s Lakers versus early 2000 Lakers, I think the 80s Lakers might win if you just look at the depth of talent.
Huh.
But I think that 3-on-3, I don't really see Kareem having Kareem having great success against Shaq. And Magic at 6'9" is not guarding Kobe Bryant. That's not a good matchup at all.
Yeah. Did you talk to Magic for this book?
No, Magic has now blown me off for 2 books. Both of my Laker books.
Wow. Wow, that sucks. He seems like a fairly approachable dude in the media and all that, but interesting.
Yeah, it happens.
Jeff, I really appreciate the time, man. You've been very generous this morning. Folks, the book comes out this Tuesday, September 22nd. Well, depending on when you listen, I'm recording this Saturday. This Tuesday, September 22nd. I bought mine on Amazon. Jeff, they can get it where else?
Everywhere. All the different
Everywhere. I wish
I don't know if you can get it in Kazakhstan, but it's out.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody's listening to this in Kazakhstan. Maybe. Jeff, I wish you best success with this book. No doubt. I assume it's going to be another New York Times bestseller. So, again, thank you for coming on.
You never know.
Yeah.
But thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for checking out Coach's Locker Podcast with Chris Fore. And, again, encourage you to check out Jeff Pearlman at jeffpearlman.com. Follow him on Twitter at Jeff Pearlman. Buy his book. It's going to be a great one. I can't wait to get my hands on it to read it. Buy that book on Amazon or, like he said, kind of anywhere you can buy books. And my podcast home is at 8laces.org/podcast. 8laces, EIGHTLACES.org/podcast, or on iTunes or anywhere really you listen to your podcast. You can reach me on Twitter at Coach Fore. That's at COACHFORE. Email address, Chris, CHRIS, at 8laces, EIGHTLACES.org. And I've got 500 articles on coachfore.org, coachfore.org. Thanks for checking us out.